Hello everyone, I'm Casper. Welcome to Testeroni, where we help the aspiring QA engineers become test automation engineers. And today I'll welcome you to the next part of our discussion about the sleep statements. And if you haven't seen the previous video, I really recommend you to do so unless you know what sleeps are and can intuitively understand how they are structured within a project. But either way, I recommend giving that video a quick watch. And today we are going to be more holistic in our approach. So in the previous video, we've done a little formal definition, and then we actually jumped to an example where we tried to actually get a feeling for what a test statement is. And today we are going to get kind of a bird's eye view over this problem. And we are going to discuss the real problems of this statement by going through not examples that much, but more through more formal definitions of the problems. We are going to use examples to actually drive the point home, but we'll try first and foremost to be more general in our approach and to actually understand what the problem may be. So let's jump to our whiteboard. So now that we have our intuition about what actually sleep statements are, let's go and try to write down the problems that actually may arise when using the sleep statements. So let's do problems of sleep statements. So first of all, it's going to be the test execution time increase. So as we were discussing before in the previous video, doing a thread sleep is always kind of a gamble. You are never 100% sure, and you can never be. It's not because of a problem on your part. It's not because of your error. It's just because that's how the sleep statements function. So the problem with them is that you are always given a guess as to for how long it should actually work. And by the definition of that guess, sometimes it is going to be just right. Sometimes it may even be too little if you underestimate it. But very often it'll be too long if you have overestimated it. And the repercussions of such a situation are that the sleep statements add unnecessary wait time to the test execution. As we have discussed before, you basically always have some unneeded overhead if you add sleep statements because they are waiting for a specific predetermined time. They are not waiting just for something to happen. That's what waits are for, and we're going to talk more about them in the next video, but they are not waiting for something to happen. They are waiting for a duration to pass. And the problem with that is that you can't have a universal duration with so much uncertainty floating around on the side of the infrastructure, on your web application, your network, limitations, time of day, type of task being executed, performance load, all these things. So the test execution time increase is inevitable. You can't really go around that. And so that's, I would say, the biggest problem. It just makes your whole framework slower than it could be and than it should be. And this can become especially significant in big test automation suites, which run after every build or run very regularly, or which just consist of many different test cases. The more test cases you have, the more places where you use sleep you have, the more it can spiral out of control, basically, and it scales very rapidly, just not in the good direction. So we have number 2, which is unreliability. So this ties a little bit into the test execution time increase. So because you have a predetermined waiting time, it's not going to be universally correct. And you may think that it's just problems from one side, like that you overestimate it and that the test automation framework may run for longer than it should because of that. But truth of the matter is that you can just as much underestimate, since all the things that are happening, all the problems with network and all the variables and all the uncertainty floating around does still induce variability in terms of the execution time, the test itself becomes unreliable in both directions. So you can actually not only get false negatives, you can also get false positives. So just because something is waiting for a specific time does not mean that it's always going to be okay because you have measured it. It can actually not be okay because suddenly it starts behaving slower and you can't really respond that fast. You can't spot every discrepancy in the way of working of the test automation suite and of the web application underneath, which is being the subject of the test itself. And so this leads to unreliability of tests, because if the wait-in time is a little eyeballed, then what does that say about your test? If the waiting time is unreliable because it's just a guess, a gamble, then how can your test be reliable? So the answer is it cannot. And that's the problem. It makes your tests unreliable. And this is in strong opposition to what your tests should be. And this ties into the test execution time increase. But like I said, it creates unreliability from both directions. Number 3 is going to be poor scalability. So like I said, the sleep statements do scale, but they scale in the wrong direction. So it's not much of an advantage on your side. They generally scale very poorly, because what works just fine on one machine or one configuration or one environment may very well not work just as well or nearly as well on a different set of configurations. And this actually causes it to scale very poorly, because how can you scale something that is fine tweaked to one specific instance? So how can you try and believe that your framework, which consists of sleeps, which were fine-tuned using your stopwatch or observation or more scientific methods even, done on your local computer, how can you presume that they are going to scale well into a cloud solution or into some kind of synchronized solution or into parallel testing? How can you think that it should work if the basis of your tests, of your experiments, maybe I should be more precise that the experiments on the test, if the way you have come at that conclusion was through experimentation on one specific instance, like your PC or your cloud at a given time of day or anywhere just under specific circumstances, you can't be sure of that. And this leads to very poor scalability, and as a consequence, a very strong inconsistency of outcomes. And that again brings us back to unreliability. You can see that all these things basically, they connect, they are all intertwined. Poor scalability is related to the fact that the tests are going to be unreliable, and that in turn is connected to the fact that test execution time is going to increase out of proportion due to no reason at all. Number 4 is going to be inefficiency. So once again, this ties also to this, but you should observe that the test execution time is not going to be the only thing that increases. Also, the usage of your resources is going to increase. The time that people are idly waiting for your test automation suite to finish so that they can merge some new functionality. All of this brings us to inefficiency. So you have inefficiency at different levels of analysis. It's not only going to be inefficiency in the form of something taking 30 seconds more than it should. So first of all, it's going to be way more than 30 seconds. It scales very rapidly, and it can easily turn into minutes, then tens of minutes, and then hours at large projects. But even if you are at a smaller project, still you are bringing on needed overhead, and you are bringing that overhead also as far as inefficiency of the resources is concerned, because you are basically making the machinery, and I'm using that very loosely because this can be an actual machine that you have, depending on your project or depending on your organizations, or it may be something in the cloud, or it may be some cloud resources. Either way, they are going to be occupied by nothing. They are going to be occupied by idly waiting for something that may have, with high probability, already happened. So it's not waiting for something to happen so that they can progress with testing. That's okay. You can't really bypass that. You can't really test something before it appears on the website. You can't really go about testing something if it's not there. So waiting is a very important topic in test automation. Just not waiting through predetermined sleep statements, because this invokes inefficiency, and this inefficiency is going to take your resources and just hog it down with no reason whatsoever, because it is not waiting for something to happen. It is just waiting for time to pass because you, the developer of that test, decided that for one reason or another, it should be like that. So you can see that it's a little of a paradox, isn't it? And last but certainly not the least is the maintainability. So the problem with hard-coded sleeps is that they are very fragile. They are very prone to breaking when the application on the test changes. So if there's some new functionality added, there's some change in the UI, there's something in your infrastructure that causes things to load through different durations suddenly or in different order, all of these things may cause the tests which are based upon sleep statements to suddenly start failing. And an improvement in the system on the test may actually mean that you need to keep updating your tests. And basically, good tests should require as little maintenance as it is possible. They may be, and they often are, very hard, or maybe not even hard, challenging to create if you want to create them elegantly and in a sensible manner. But after they are there, I would even warrant a thought that actually good automated tests don't need much maintenance overhead afterwards. They may need quite a bit of scratching your head during or before when you are getting prepared to create them. But after they have been created, they shouldn't be so much of a pain point. And by adding sleep statements, you are basically setting yourself up for failure in that department, because any improvement within that system with very high probability is going to mean constant need for upkeep on your side. And you will need to constantly update the waiting times, and you will need to update the way that it's waiting, like in which places should it sleep, for how long, let's measure it. And not to mention that it also adds some obscurity to all of that, because if someone needs to update it and you have created it, they have with very high probability no idea why that precise sleep is in that spot and why it's waiting for that precise duration. And even if you, and I also touched upon that point in the previous video, even if you need to do some upkeep of your own tests after a few days, weeks, months, usually it's not even months, it's more like weeks, you will with very high probability not remember exactly why each sleep is in the place that it is in and why it's taking this or that amount of time. So the more of sleeps you introduce within your code, the more chaos you bring into your code, the more uncertainty you bring regarding why it's there and why it's waiting for this or that amount of time, both on the other people's side, but also on your side. Believe me, you are going to have a very hard time keeping up with the updates in the application when you can't focus on actually doing the tests, like writing the assertions that it needs to do, which is challenging in and of itself, because you need to constantly fight with the waiting times so as not to make the tests flaky, but also so as not to make it wait for too long or too little. It's a constant battle, and a battle that you don't actually need to partake in, because you can just go for different routes of solving that problem. And we are going to discuss all of them in the next video, where we dive more into possible alternatives. But for now, just keep in mind that the maintainability is a very weak point of a test automation framework that is based on sleep statements. Hard-coded sleep statements just obscure the logic behind the code and make it very hard to actually focus on what's important within the test, rather than all the things that are around that test and all the things that are preparing the test to or setting up the environment in order to be able to be used in a way that it should. So it actually obscures it both for other team members and like blocks or hinders collaboration for the future, which is a big pain point in when you're working in an organization and you are not just an island or on the ocean. But also it makes it harder for you to debug it in the future and to keep up. So now that we've discussed all of it, when you see such big pain points, you may think, okay, so that just means that sleep statements are bad. That's all I needed to know. Thanks, Casper. See you. So no. That would be too easy. We are taking a holistic approach, and here at Testroni, we always try to play the devil's advocate a bit too, because there's always some truth to be found in that. And I would say that there certainly are situations where sleep statements are either very helpful or actually the best way to go about things. And the example we have discussed in the previous lesson, or the problems we have discussed in this lesson, may make you a little hesitant to trust me on that one. But in the next video, believe me that I am going to do my best to play the devil's advocate and to actually tell you that there are situations where the sleep statement is going to be your best friend, either for the short term or for the long term, because of some other aspects that we have not touched upon in this one specific example or in this general overview. Sleep statements do have their place. They are not a forbidden word. They are not the name which shall not be called. There are certainly scenarios where you want to go for the sleep statements. And so we are going to focus on them in the next video. Now that we know both what sleep statements are, we know the examples of them. So that's the things that we have talked about in the previous video. And we know the problems of sleep statements in general in a more bird's eye view. We are ready to actually see where they are useful and to do a complete summary of what to do when we don't want to use them, when we want to use them, and what are the possible alternatives. And all these things are going to be discussed in the next video. For now, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you are getting really interested in the thing about sleep statements and where they actually do have a place in this whole landscape of test automation. And I hope to provide it to you in the next episode. Thank you for your attention and keep on rocking.